Hi, I'm Arsh and I work as a senior DevRel engineer at Metalbear. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to Mirrord and show you a demo of how it works. Mirrord is a tool that lets you run your local code as if it was running inside a Kubernetes cluster, but without building any container images or deploying. Your code still runs locally, but Mirrord proxies incoming and outgoing traffic, files, and environment variables between the locally running process and the cluster. The result is that your locally running process behaves as if it's running in the cloud, even though it's still running on your machine. This lets you test your code against real services, real data, and real traffic without deploying anything. You no longer have to rely on local mocks or wait for CI pipelines and staging deployments. Now, let's see this in action. I have a shopping cart app called MetalMart, which is deployed on my staging cluster. It is made up of a couple of services, including a Postgres database and a Kafka queue. When you place an order using the front-end service, it first checks stock with the inventory service and processes a mock payment with the payment service. Then it emits an order event to the Kafka queue, which is consumed by the delivery service. Finally, it sends a request to the order service, which stores the order details in a Postgres database. The order service sends back a response to the front-end service, which we can see if we check the network tab in the browser. Our application is already deployed on a staging cluster, and we can see all the services running there. The application is available at the endpoint playground.metalbear.dev/shop, which we saw earlier in the browser. Mirrord can be used as a CLI or as a code editor extension available for almost all code editors, including VS Code, Cursor, etc., and all the JetBrains IDEs. For this demo, I'm using Cursor, and I go to the extensions page and download the Mirrord extension. I already have the kubeconfig for my staging cluster available locally. I click on the Mirrord button to enable it. I've added 2 breakpoints in my code for the order service. First is for a function that returns text for a banner, which is displayed at the bottom of the page. The text is read from a file that is on the cluster and not on my local machine. The second breakpoint I've set is for when the order status is returned to the front-end service. We expect both these endpoints to get hit when Mirrord mirrors traffic to our locally running process. Now, I hit run and debug on Cursor, and we see that it starts to run the service locally using Mirrord. But first, we have to pick the target service in the staging cluster, which in our case is in the shop namespace. Here, we select the order service as the remote target, and then wait for the order service to start running locally as well using Mirrord. Now Mirrord will mirror traffic, files, and environment variables between the remote order service and the locally running one. When we visit the staging endpoint where the application is deployed, we see our banner breakpoint gets hit because the front end is making a request to load the text. This shows that Mirrord successfully mirrored the request from the cluster to our local process, which is why the breakpoint got hit. Then my locally running process is also able to load text from the file at this location, which exists only on the cluster and not on my local machine. Now I'm going to let this request continue and go to the front end and place an order. This time, when I switch back to my code editor, I see that the second breakpoint that I had set gets hit because Mirrord mirrored the request to place an order to my locally running order service. So far we have seen how Mirrord mirrors not only traffic but also files and environment variables between the locally running process and the cluster. What this does is it enables you to see and test how your local code would behave when running in the cluster, but without you having to build and push container images. The mirror mode we saw is useful in testing how your code handles real requests from the cluster. But what if you want to test the response of your code as well? If we make a code change locally in the order service right now, it will still be the order service running in the remote cluster which responds to the request. To have our locally running order service respond instead of the remote one, we can use the steal mode in Mirrord. What this does is it steals the request coming to the target and sends them only to your locally running process and not the remote service in the cluster. And the response then is also sent by the local service instead of the remote one. But we also don't want to steal all the requests coming to the order service, because that would mean we'll be disrupting the flow for other developers using the cluster. To avoid that, we can set an HTTP header filter, and Mirrord will then only steal requests which have this header filter set. For this, we update our configuration settings which tell Mirrord to steal only the requests with our header filter. Once this is done, I'll go to my code and update the order confirmation text to say hello from local process. I'll also add a breakpoint in the line where my code talks to the existing database in staging to save the order. Now, we'll go to the UI, and I have the Mirrord Chrome extension, but you can use anything which lets you attach HTTP headers, and I'll add the header we specified in our filters. Now when I place an order, you'll first see that we don't immediately see the confirmation page. This is because the request has been stolen to our locally running process where it has hit our breakpoint. Here we can see the locally running process was able to communicate with the database in the staging cluster and get the order ID, which is the ID of the row where this order is saved in the database. In case you want to avoid accessing the staging database, we have a feature called database branching, which lets you work with a clone of the staging database. You can learn more about that in our docs. Now, when we let it proceed, we see the confirmed order with the text that we changed locally in our code. I want to emphasize that we are getting this response from the staging cluster where our application is deployed, but without having to build or deploy our current code changes. We haven't even committed our code, and yet we are able to see how it will behave when pushed to staging or production. This is how Mirrord enables you to see how your code would behave by running it in the context of the cluster. This saves so much time during development because developers are now able to test their code in a production-like environment without going through time-consuming CI pipelines and deployments. But that's not all that Mirrord does. In this demo, we saw how an individual developer would use Mirrord. But one of Mirrord's core features is enabling shared development on a single Kubernetes cluster. With Mirrord, multiple developers can use the same Kubernetes cluster for development without blocking each other. The HTTP filters we saw in this demo are only one of the many features Mirrord has to enable this shared development. We also have features like database branching and queue splitting, which ensure that each developer only interacts with their own slice of traffic and data without affecting other developers or the shared environment. On top of that, Mirrord also includes guardrails. With Mirrord, platform teams can control what developers are allowed to do and prevent unsafe operations like writing to a sensitive database by default. All of these combined make Mirrord a much better and less expensive choice than something like personal dev environments. Large organizations like Monday.com, Zooplus, and SurveyMonkey already have hundreds of developers using Mirrord concurrently, sharing a Kubernetes environment for development every day. If you too want to provide your developers with realistic environments that speed up their velocity, check out our website metalbear.com/Mirrord to learn more.